We all love wrestling secrets. In fact, we are obsessed with them. The rumors and murmurings are what keeps so many people hooked to sports entertainment these days, and why the hell not? It's there to bring you joy, and if that's how you find it, go nuts. Over the years, though, so many of these have been turned into utter nonsense because we're all idiots and we believe too much. Yep. So hello, I am Simon from WhatCulture. Please do subscribe. And this is 10 wrestling secrets everybody knows except you. When I say you, I mean me. And also you. Number 10, that Shield myth everybody believes. Way back when, there was chatter that Chris Hero was meant to be part of the Shield. I think even CM Punk mentioned this at one point, and yet after all this time, no one did the smart thing and asked Hero until In the Ropes finally did. And do you want to know what he said? He had no clue what we were talking about. Or at least not in the context it became. Because when this was talked about as an idea, Punk just wanted to have a group with Chris, Dean Ambrose, and Seth Rollins. They weren't the Shield, there was no Shield, the Shield hadn't been invented yet, so saying Hero was meant to be in it was annoying. That's not my words, that's what Chris said. He also mentioned that he had never chatted to CM about this, so it quite literally was something that got pinged out there, and that was that. Will this ever die though? Of course not. Number 9, stop getting old WWE pay-per-views wrong. I get it. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, you don't know. But a lot of fans who are relatively new to pro wrestling find old WWF pay-per-views and get very confused. Why? Because they can seem a bit boring. For you see, unlike the modern world where the pay-per-view or premium live event serves as the payoff to a story or a feud, in many ways it was just an over-the-top exhibition with a couple of fights that actually had narrative and consequences. Vince McMahon would much rather you bought a ticket to a future event or find them on television, so it was balanced as such. It's why you can find cards that have 14 matches on them. Nothing really happens for large parts, but that wasn't the point. I mean, the fact you even got to see a superstar was meant to be enough. I would never fly in 2022. Number 8, the difference between booking and matchmaking. It's why if The Rock and Roman Reigns do go at it at WrestleMania 39, the reason will be because it's super duper cool, which was the same when Stone Cold Steve Austin took on Kevin Owens at this year's WrestleMania. I mean, the reason behind it was due to the fact KO hated Texas. You don't need to worry about it. There are exceptions, as Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins killed it in 2022, but usually it's one angle, one night, repeat it for a few weeks, do something else. It does seem slightly mad as wrestling never ends, so you'd think some extended storylines would be the easiest way to fill TV time, but no. We'll just do another Battle Royal instead. Number 7, the never-ending WrestleMania 3 attendance row. Given that WrestleMania 3 happened in 1987, it's amazing that we continue to talk about how many people actually went to the event. The announced figure of 93,173 was debunked by the Wrestling Observer's Dave Meltzer, who said there was closer to 78,000 paid, which is still pretty impressive. This is where the difference of opinion may come into play, however, as years later when we got to Mania 32, Vince McMahon admitted he counts every single person in the building for these numbers. The wrestlers, the staff, himself. If you are standing somewhere on the premises, you're going in. Even then, it seems unlikely an extra 15,000 people were just hanging out playing Nintendo, and I would hazard a guess that as the Pope had drawn 88,000 people to the same arena in September 1987, WWE just wanted to say they beat him. This goes further too, because apparently, when his team found out about what they'd done, the Pope's number magically increased to 93,682. You gotta love it. Number 6, the lack of stadium Attitude Era shows. When WrestleMania 17 was announced for the Houston Astrodome in 2001, people could not believe it. The popularity of wrestling had reached such highs they could pack fans into this kind of a building, yet today we just do that all of the time. In fact, I will put my life on the line that now, Mania will never be held anywhere but a stadium again. I just want to make it very clear that I do not mean that. It's my life. That would be stupid. The truth, though, is that WWE waited until this chapter of their history before they pulled the trigger on such things. There were exceptions, such as a Raw that drew 41,000 in Toronto Sky Dome in 1999 and 45,000 in the Georgia Dome later that year, but otherwise they stuck to their usual routine until this moment. Then the gloves came off. So you could say the success of the Attitude Era wasn't physically showcased till well past the millennium, hence why the first Stone Cold Rock WrestleMania clash happened in the first Union Center in front of a crowd that was only just over 20,000. You think they'd do that now? No way. Number 5, Andre the Giant, the legendary myths. Andre the Giant was amazing. Do not be swayed any other way. Andre was also legitimately enormous, but because he passed away a full decade before the internet became a thing, a lot of these numbers have been sent wildly out of proportion. Some wrestlers will still tell you he was 7'3", he was not, and Hulk Hogan went as far as to insist he once saw the Giant down 108 beers in 45 minutes. Andre could clearly put them away, but that's just silly. The Hulkster would also say he needed special toilets, and this is why good practice is to watch the newer documentaries about the Hall of Famer to get a true reflection of the man who really did change the industry forevermore. I mean, there's a reason we're still talking about him right now, and it's not because he once ate a car or something. That would be a waste of time anyway. Number 4, Hulk Hogan, Jesse Ventura, and wrestling unions. So for years, we have known that Hulk Hogan was responsible for stopping the WWE unionizing in 1986. As the story goes, Jesse Ventura was all ready to do this when Hogan snitched this out to Vince McMahon, and the whole thing was stopped. This has taken on a life of its own recently, so the best thing to do is get the exact account from Ventura when he appeared on Steve Austin's podcast a few years ago. Jesse spoke about standing up in the dressing room in the build to WrestleMania 2 and said, "If we go together, we can simply tell the media we are not wrestling unless union negotiators by federal law come in and give us the opportunity to unionize." Everybody was ready to storm the gates, and then 24 hours later, Vince called him and threatened to let him go. It then got even crazier, as after this pay-per-view, Ventura left the company for a while to film Predator, which meant he was now part of the Screen Actors Guild, which, yes, is a union. As he had this, and as Jesse put it, the rest of the boys were too stupid not to join him, he promised to never try again. The final piece, of course, is the proof that Hogan was responsible for all of this, and it actually came out during the deposition Ventura brought against, wait for it, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. This was all situated around money and rights, so when the question of a union came up in court, Jesse's lawyer simply asked Vince who had told him, and he stooged Hulk off instantly. It was at this moment that the friendship between Hogan and Ventura basically came to an end, as the latter realized the former was basically all about himself and what cash he could get. So that's the way it went down, my friends. As long as you believe the body, of course. Number 3, Vince McMahon is not funny, says John Moxley. You only need to find any John Moxley interview to get his opinions on his run with WWE, because the dude is an open book and happy to talk about it. This was especially true when he appeared on Talk is Jericho and really wanted to get into the truth behind Vince McMahon's unique sense of humor. The worst, or best moment, came when Mox was handed a script where it said he had to talk about a pooper scooper. Yep. Enraged, the then Dean Ambrose decided not to say it and panicked because he knew if Vince saw it, that would be that, he'd love it, and it would be a must. Instead, Ambrose and the writers changed it to Dean telling the audiences he wouldn't come in front of them even if he was wearing a gas mask. What happened the next week? That's right, the lunatic fringe was told to walk to the ring wearing a gas mask. He was also immunized so he wouldn't get their diseases, but that is how it happened. McMahon saw one line and turned it into a whole angle. It sucked. Number 2, papering the house. Thanks to the world of social media and accounts like WrestleTix, you can find out what is actually happening when it comes to sales for any promotion. Even then, though, you'd never know if there's a bad draw on TV. WWE and AEW have become masters at making sure every single show looks packed. The true masters were TNA because, seriously, go and watch any event they did in the mid-2000s and try and guess what the attendance was. If you assume it's 10,000 plus, you won't be alone, because those guys just knew how to make even the smallest crowd look monstrous. It's a real skill. The other secret that's not chatted about too is the fact that yes, companies give out free tickets, because of course they do. If you haven't been able to shift them, you want to get people through the door anyway, so be it promotional schemes, offering them to radio stations, schools, shopping centers, whatever. Nothing beats a sold out house, so you gotta do what you gotta do. Number 1, Sasha Banks' 2020 numbers. It seems like Sasha Banks is going to leave WWE. We don't know this for sure at the moment, but the chances are high, and as and when she does, her in-ring legacy will be enough to rival anybody in history. And the one figure I want you to take away today happened on the 8th of November 2020 edition of SmackDown. On this night, over 2.5 million people tuned in to see Banks take on Bayley for the Women's Championship, and not even the awesome Roman Reigns has been able to outdo that since he returned to the Blue Brand earlier the same year. The real shocking point is that this was in the flippin' Thunderdome, so fans just really wanted to see Sasha become the champ.
Taking advantage of contract blunders only making decisions final at the very last second, or simply doing everything humanly possible to keep a huge impending moment under wraps, have all led to some of the most astonishing happenings in wrestling history. So I am Gareth, this is WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are the 10 best kept secrets in wrestling history. Number 10, John Cena's Royal Rumble return. A return so deeply shocking and exciting, 20,000 folks briefly forgot it wasn't cool to love John Cena during the late 2000s. Wonderful stuff. After going down injured in October 2007 with a pectoral tear, most expected to not see the face that runs the place for around 6 months to a year. But this freak of nature isn't your average human being, folks. About a month before his sensational comeback inside of Madison Square Garden during the 2008 Royal Rumble, folks within the company were already aware one of the most unlikeliest of comebacks was on, according to Bruce Pritchard on his Something to Wrestle pod. And then when the time came to execute this monumental surprise at the pay-per-view, Cena was hidden all day, and even marched through the hallway covered when the time came to finally blow the roof off of MSG. All that effort to keep this Rumble return under wraps paid off and then some in the end though. Number 9, Malachi Black is suddenly all elite. It may not have led to the sort of consistently mesmerizing run folks were hoping for, but Malachi Black's first night as an all-elite menace is still one of the most surprising and captivating Tony Khan's company has ever seen. And what made Black's arrival on the night of July 7th, 2021 so legitimately stunning was the fact not a single soul honestly thought the former NXT champion had a chance of appearing on AEW TV for at least a few more months. You see, in the wake of being released by WWE on June 2nd, most assumed Black would have to stick to the typical 90-day non-compete clause the sports entertainment companies stick in their contracts. However, with Black working on the Black and Gold developmental brand for a time before being called up to the main roster, it was eventually revealed that WWE had stupidly failed to update the star's NXT 30-day non-compete clause to the usual main roster 90-day one after he hopped over to Raw and SmackDown. What came next was one of the coolest debuts in AEW history. A blackout led to the amazing reveal of the former Aleister Black secretly signing with the company, before Arn Anderson was utterly pulverized with a spinning heel kick at that year's Road Rager. Now I've got a quick question for you. What do you think's been the best ever AEW debut? Was it Malachi Black's spinning heel kick to the Arn? Or something else? You let me know in the comment section down below, baby. Number 8, Christian Cage is cleared for a Rumble comeback. Returning to the greatest multi-person match in all of wrestling now, and yet another moment nobody ever thought could actually be a possibility heading into a Royal Rumble event. Now sure, the prior year's men's over-the-top rope epic had seen the unlikely comeback of a certain rated R superstar, folks also once thought they'd never see bumping again. But rumours of Edge's impossible return becoming a reality were very much doing the rounds before the 2020 Rumble. The same could not be said for the WWE Hall of Famer's best pal though he had technically taken part in an unsanctioned fight with Randy Orton in 2020, away from that 1-minute squash, Christian hadn't been involved in a match since retiring due to concussion issues. That all changed on the night of the 2021 Men's Rumble, however, with Christian and a few others actually being made aware of the fact he'd been cleared to return a few months before the event, after them managing to keep that vital information a secret in the time leading up to the Thunderdome show. Captain Charisma was finally given the thumbs up to make a jaw-dropping comeback to action on the Friday before the PLE. And with that, the once unthinkable visual of Edge and Christian competing in a WWE match together soon unexpectedly warmed the hearts of genuinely stunned fans around the globe. Number 7, no one knew Pat McAfee was going to be calling the Rumble 2023 action. It wasn't just those watching the 2023 Royal Rumble inside of the Alamo Dome and at home that were caught entirely off guard by Pat McAfee's unannounced arrival that night. If it wasn't already clear from the way an unquestionably stunned and overjoyed Michael Cole reacted to the return of his Blue Show pal, and Corey Graves' hilarious exasperation at being nudged down the bench, it was later noted that neither man had any clue Pat was going to be back that night. The majority of WWE's production crew weren't told about the awesome McAfee secret either, with WWE's decision to keep the epic return to the booth close to the vest, kicking the event off in the most unpredictable and joyous way imaginable. Watching a legitimately giddy Cole then be told in real time that his mate would be joining the twosome for the entire night of action was a terrifically wholesome moment too, and one that wouldn't have been possible had someone let the pat out of the bag beforehand. Number 6, Roman Reigns wrecks everybody out of nowhere. Heading into the first crowdless SummerSlam in WWE history, the company promised the folks locked up in their homes around the world that they would never see it coming. And in what had become something of a rarity at that point, WWE actually only went and delivered a truly remarkable shock that no fan on the planet honestly foresaw in the weeks before the biggest party of the summer. The big dog hadn't been seen on WWE programming since dropping out of WrestleMania 36 and taking some time away from wrestling during those early pandemic days. And with there being very few hints at exactly what the future held for the former world champion in the months that followed the show of shows, outside of WWE eventually releasing new merch for the absent figure, most understandably assumed that aforementioned tagline was likely just referring to even more demented fiend Braun Strowman shenanigans in the main event. What they didn't expect to see was Roman Reigns not only making a shocking post-match return to all things sports entertainment, but as a badass heel who ate spooky monsters for breakfast at the head of the table. To ensure this monumental show-closing return would come as a real game-changing shock to much of the wrestling world, Dave Meltzer noted on Wrestling Observer Radio that WWE didn't even tell a bunch of Roman's fellow superstars that he was about to come back and kick off one of the most dominant runs in wrestling history either, and he's never looked back since. Cheers for watching this video today, and if you like what you see, then go and hit that subscribe button down below. Number 5, Shane O'Mac brings back the money. Long before he strutted out as one of WrestleMania 39's best-kept secrets, and unfortunately limped back out again a minute or so later, Shane McMahon found himself in the middle of an even bigger shock return in 2016. It had been announced that someone was going to be handed the most prestigious award that WWE will ever present on the night of February 22nd, that being the Vincent J. McMahon Legacy of Excellence Award, of course. But just before Vince could hand the award over to the on-screen heel with a quote-unquote warm, good-hearted soul known as Stephanie McMahon, a rather familiar tune blasted through the speakers. The money was back, baby! And a crowd that had just spent much of the last few minutes groaning and watting their way through another soul-crushing start to Raw suddenly erupted in stunned euphoria. Nobody had a Shane O'Mac comeback on their 2016 WWE bingo card, that's for sure. Vince would later tell the Orlando Sentinel that the big reveal was kept a secret, thanks to Shane being locked away on a bus until the moment Stephanie's music hit that night. And when Shane-O did eventually show up in Gorilla moments before shaking things up a little, the folks sat around reportedly said they couldn't believe what was happening. They were likely saying something similar back in April, after watching Snoop Dogg drop a surreal people's elbow to cover for the destroyer of the 2022 Men's Royal Rumble's torn quad. Number 4, it's Sting in AEW. Returning to an era most folks understandably don't have the fondest memories of, AEW also managed to give their audience a much-needed shot of completely unforeseen joy during their first ever Dynamite Winter is Coming event in 2020. Now sure, folks were aware that the legendary Sting had quietly parted ways with WWE midway through the year, and it did feel like AEW was a logical destination for the icon at some point in the future. But very few predicted precisely when that debut was going to go down, and that was largely due to the likes of the Young Bucks and Tony Khan keeping Sting's incredible arrival under wraps for months. Matt and Nick Jackson would also confirm to Living the Gimmick that they used the old hide your massive surprise in a trailer trick on the day of the event. And when it was finally time for the Stinger to wander into position, the EVPs recalled watching the genuinely shocked talent inevitably mark out around him. Similar reactions were no doubt happening all over the planet when Tony Schiavone let out an iconic "It's Sting" for the first time on AEW programming, as all involved pulled off one of the finest surprise arrivals of the modern era. Number 3, Mark Henry was far from finished. After being a part of the WWE system since 1996, lifting World Championship gold and enjoying a terrific Hall of Pain run, most fans were quick to believe the once unstoppable Mark Henry was done when he began teasing retirement on Twitter in June of 2013. And right up to the moment the emotional powerhouse had his arm raised by John Cena after telling those watching on that he was retiring from the active roster, there wasn't a person out there who didn't fully believe they were watching the end of the lovable big man's in-ring career. Then, in a move that left millions of jaws banging off the floor, Henry only went and revealed the entire thing was one big swerve, nailing Cena with a world's pinkest slam in the middle of the ring. Henry would later admit down the road that he was actually considering retiring around this time, but after Vince McMahon talked him out of it, the committed star then spent months tricking folks into believing the end was near. And after successfully keeping the real plan to have him actually attack Cena and set up a match for Money in the Bank over the WWE Championship a secret, through his brilliant retirement teases and moving speech, Henry masterfully completed one of the greatest shock turns of all time. Number 2, Brock Lesnar beats the streak. The Undertaker's streak shockingly coming to a heartbreaking end at WrestleMania 30 WWE was a call that very few outside of the key players involved had any idea was about to rock the Superdome. In fact, it was reported in the Wrestling Observer newsletter around the time that referee Chad Patton was actually told Taker would be walking out of New Orleans with a 22-0 record. But with the rule being for WWE officials to ref the contest as a shoot, Patton simply brought his hand down for the incredible 3. It would also later be revealed by Taker himself in an interview with Ariel Helwani that the original plan up until the day of the show was actually for the dead man to go over the beast on the grandest stage. But early that afternoon, Vince made his way into the Phenom's dressing room and secretly changed wrestling history forever, altering the old finish to the one that ultimately involved the concussed icon being F5 to smithereens for the Brock win. And just a few hours later, the entire wrestling world was left feeling utterly shook by a first ever Taker Mania L that came completely out of left field. And number 1, CM Punk comes back home to WWE. It still feels rather surreal to be living in a world where this chip magnet is once again strutting around Monday Night Raw with a potential pipe bomb in his back pocket. But after arguably the best kept wrestling secret of all time, well, here we are. After months of speculation and many a report debunking the idea of CM Punk making a shocking return to WWE, the unthinkable became a deafening reality inside of the All-State Arena in 2023. This wasn't a case of simply lying about what was on the horizon for months though. It was reported that WWE and Punk only made a deal together around 10 days or so before Survivor Series, with the wise decision then being made to keep the whole thing a secret heading into the War Games show. Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer even noted how certain TKO group executives were not told about the incoming Best in the World, with the folks in the War Games main event being among the few who actually knew Punk was in the building, and this genuinely shocking return being kept from almost everyone. All this secrecy resulted in a noise unlike anything you're ever likely to hear again, as the Punkers shocked the world one more time in Chicago.
Hello all of you wonderful people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com. And I don't know if you've ever watched Breaking the Magician's Code before on TV, but we're kind of going to do the same thing today, but within the wrestling industry. Now, normally I would just don a mask and use a
voice-altering feature to disguise myself through fear of reprisal, but
to be honest, A, the business is more exposed than a nudist beach, and B, the WWE already hates us, so in for a penny, in for a devaluing pound and all that guff. And to be honest, the things that we're going to be talking about today are happening right in front of us, so it's less about exposing something and more just going, oh yeah, that's a bit odd, right? With this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 wrestling secrets hiding in plain sight. Number 10. Listen to the sounds. One of the biggest cons in wrestling is the way that talents attack each other with weapons. Now, outside of the WWE, things seem to be more lax, seeing as you can literally drive spikes through your opponent in some promotions. Yet within Vince's Slap Shack, things are much more restrained. Look at the chair shots that are wisely now only to the back. Look at the times that Triple H holds the tip of his hammer, hello Vicar, as he hits his opponents. And for anyone thinking that Trips did a number on Big Dave's back at Mania 35 with that chain, well, take a look at this image. The photo, kindly provided by the WWE themselves, actually exposes one of the more exciting moments of this somewhat crawling match, as the sound of that chain hitting Batista echoed throughout the arena. Or at least that's what you'd think until you saw this image, because clearly Trips is hitting the announce table and not Dave's rippling back muscles. It's a clever but simple trick that, whilst looking dangerous, is basically the same as Homer Simpson beating up his barbecue in that episode. What a reference. Number 9. The face wash brainwash. So if you've not heard of it, you should definitely go and check out the YouTube channel Pro Wrestling Cinema, who recently put up a brilliant slow-mo highlights package of GCW's Spring Break. It's just over 20 minutes of pure bliss, showing how much actual graft has to go into each and every move. From Canadian destroyers to big old chops that would fill your belly alongside a Sunday roast, it is brilliant to see the craft up close and in such great detail. However, it's also a bit of a shame, as it actually is one that exposes one of the best moves of Shinjiro Otani, aka his much imitated face wash spot. Usually this is a brilliant bit of foot in mouth not seen outside of an Adam Wilborn video, but here, well, it's rather the shoulder that takes a bit of cleaning rather than his opponent's mug. Number 8. Red flag. If there's one thing that you can say about Ric Flair, apart from the fact that he's one of the greatest wrestlers ever to have laced boots, it's that he was not a subtle man. His hair was so bright that you needed sunglasses to look at, and his tan was set to, well, brisket, not to mention his promo delivery and in-ring stylings. Therefore, is it any surprise and also not at all a shock to learn that Flair often let us know that he was going to win or lose based on his choice of ring attire? I know it sounds mad, but it's true, and dusty old scribe legend that is Michael Sidgwick went back through tons of Flair's important pay-per-view matches and noticed that if he was taking the big L, then he would wear red ring gear, and if he was going over like Rover, he'd sport the Royal Victory blue. Now, why he'd advertise this fact to the audience once they're in the know is anyone's guess, and no one has actually been able to get a real answer out of him. But all you need to know is that he does it, and it's blatantly obvious once you've clocked it. Number 7, the giveaway. This doesn't get said enough, but come on, let's praise the good old wrestling referee. They have got a tough old time of it, haven't they? For one, they have to act like they're made of paper if they so much as get a glancing blow to the air around them and stay down for absolutely ages, but they also have to pretend like they've got the IQ of a sponge, while at the same time secretly making sure that the match is going to plan, feeding wrestlers info, making sure that things are in the right place, and notifying people in the back if a talent is actually hurt. It's a tough balancing act to keep your eye on the ball, and it's the eyes that actually give away one of wrestling's biggest secrets. If you watch, you'll see that more often than not, referees aren't actually watching the shoulders of the wrestler when counting the pin or sliding in to start counting. This is because they're watching the eyes of the talent. If the wrestler stares back at the referee, this signals the continuation of the match. When their eyes stare off into the distance, that's your finish, which is brilliant, but oh so strange once you notice it. After all, it's the shoulders that they should be looking at, right? Number 6, the leg slap. We all know how it feels to recoil at the sound of a devastating super kick, and it can range from a wincingly high-pitched one to an almost dull thud of a gunshot, depending on who is swinging that big boot around. Yet, in real life, and I don't suggest that you try this unless you are bigger than your opponent and can run faster than the police, is that kicking people in the head doesn't actually make that type of sound. So where does it come from? Well, it turns out that it's not so much of an impact on the face and more an impact on the executing talent's thigh. Things move so quickly that you can barely register this, and with quick camera work of most promotions, you'll be none the wiser watching at home, but it's true. The hit that you're actually hearing is just the result of a huge trick slapper not seen since your mum was on the game. Who am I kidding? She still is. And also, that was my one per list. Number 5, the boo-boo face. Now this one might seem strange, but looking back at Mania 35's women tag title match, there was a clear indication of the dissatisfaction bubbling under the surface of Sasha Banks and Bayley as they made their entrances. Now the pair at this point were tag champs. I mean, everything should have been rosy, right? Well, for the most part it was, and the pair still forced a smile and schmoozed as you'd expect on their way to the ring, yet when they held their belts aloft and the world snapped their picture, they dropped the pretense and picked up the pissed off face. An image for the world to see that captured the dissatisfaction they clearly felt towards their position within the company, and most likely to the fact that they were saying goodbye to the titles that they'd helped will into existence. Basically, it's the exact face that you'd pull if you'd found out that you were losing to the Iconics. I'm sorry, Wilbon. Number 4, stunt grannies. The wrestling plant is not just a whomping willow on steroids, but a name given to a person in the crowd who's been selected by the company to either interact with the match at some point or even get in the way to take a body, acting as a fleshy barrier to the real crowd. It's a brilliant way of making the event feel like it can't be contained, and it's been done in numerous ways across the timeline. From Mrs. Dad trying to outbox the legend, the myth, the potato prince himself, Shane O'Mac, from a granny trying to bray Hulk Hogan back in WCW, it is a brilliant spot and a brilliant pop, but ultimately it is all just a ruse. Still though, it's hard not to cheer for these plucky no-hopers, although it is a bit strange and a bit of a shame that we've not seen the crowd, who are usually so vocal at how they could beat up anyone, not help these poor souls. Oh well, I'm sure that they're not just full of hot air, right? Yeah, I'm sure of it. Number 3, chatty faces. This next entry is just an unfortunate reality of the high definition that we're used to now, and the all-seeing eye of wrestling filming. As the decades have passed and technology has improved, and the fact that we now have multiple camera operators on the show floor, it's hard to hide when wrestlers are actually relaying information to one another in the ring. I mean, we've all seen it, a chin lock which looks very much like the person applying it is telling them a very aggressive bedtime story. And we've even heard it multiple times when Big Match John can't keep his damn big mouth shut and calls out his matches. Now, if promotions were smarter, they'd be able to cover this with lots of angles to cut between to mask what's going on. But you know what? There are other times when simply this is impossible to avoid and it's right there in front of us. Number 2, squeezing. Back to the boys in black and white again, as have you ever noticed just how caring and tender referees are in their matches? And I'm not just talking about the fact that if any of them actually tried to hurt the talents, they'd be turned inside out, but how after big spots they always slide over and gently squeeze each wrestler. Isn't that nice? Kind of like your nan making you a cup of tea and asking if you'd like a biscuit. However, it's obviously because the refs can't just shout, "Oh my god, are you okay?" as having to get a response from the talent would ruin the illusion. So instead they use a quick squeeze to initiate the performer to squeeze back. If they don't press back, then there is a real-life problem. But if they do, it's all good and we're ready for some more violence. And number 1, Vince McMahon's temper. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were, of course, the perfect double act. The pearl-clutching moral compass and the pearl necklace-pouring commentary team of the WWF's white-hot attitude era. The presentation was so authentic and free-flowing and allowed audiences to immerse themselves in the pair's believable friendship. Yet, as the years have continued, the banter has been reined in and spread very thinly across a larger commentary team, and now listening to the WWE product is now harder than ever to just sit back and enjoy. However, it's the silences that you need to pay attention to, as when you can't hear anything, that means one thing. No, not that the match is boring, although who knows, it might actually be, but that Vince McMahon is usually blowing his bloody lid. Through interviews and shoots, we've learned from the likes of Mick Foley and others that Vinnie Mac bleeds right through that headset when things aren't going right, and I can only imagine that the fury of his words would be enough to silence anyone. Therefore, if you notice any lulls in the commentary, someone's in trouble. And when you notice it, oh, it's delicious.
I mean, you've seen the title. How can I even try to do an intro that does a better job than that? I am Simon from WhatCulture. Please do subscribe. And yeah, here's 10 dark secrets wrestlers accidentally revealed. Number 10, Hulk Hogan gets in serious trouble. So this is super hard to talk about because it's just bad. All you need to do is Google the reaction the WWE locker room had to Hulk Hogan's apology to have it summed up for you. Not good. For those that don't know, though, during some sort of affair between Hogan and the wife of radio DJ Bubba the Love Sponge, and let's not get into it any more than that, Hulk was secretly recorded saying some truly abhorrent things that are 100% racist. In fact, that was the whole thing. That's what he said, and I quote, "I am racist to a point. It is unbelievable." It was in reference to daughter Brooke Hogan's partner, and it is just horrendous to watch. To even have this thought? There's no words. It did get worse, however, because when saying sorry, the Hulkster was more worried about warning others you never know who's listening, as opposed to, not being an awful human. Now, neither you or I were there, so we don't know the total truth, but there's still no excusing what did happen. It certainly targets the Hulkamania legacy forever. Number 9, the Vince McMahon versus Triple H tension. And not sexual, in case you were thinking that way. What's wrong with you? But when Triple H took ownership of NXT, he had a plan. We can get our superstars of tomorrow ready, and then send them up to the main roster with a story, and bam, they'll fly. This would have rocked if we had followed through on it, but you know the deal. Instead, Vince McMahon would take over when Raw and SmackDown came into play, and anything we'd done on NXT was just gone. It sucked. It was a waste of time. Literally. Triple H actually hinted at this on a TakeOver conference call where he said, "People don't see the things they're missing from this side." That was in reference to these odd transitions, so he must have known. And we do know. Everybody knows. In 2019, the game even liked a tweet from a fan saying all of this before he promptly unliked it, because you can imagine the reaction. But who wouldn't be annoyed? You put in all this work and then nope, see you later. Number 8, a lot of other Twitter likes. And there's more of these as well. I'm not sure who is keeping an eye on wrestlers' social media 24/7. Whatever makes you happy, I suppose. You are a bit weird. A few that have come to light over the years include Jim Ross liking a tweet criticizing New Japan when he was working for New Japan, and Sasha Banks doing the same when a user posted they were so bored of Raw they couldn't watch it anymore. I mean, that was in 2019, and And we all remember that. Jack Perry also liked another with someone claiming CM Punk was guilty of assault during the Brawl Out to All Out, but let's be a little bit fair here. While some of these are clearly individuals being caught in the act, accidental clicks are a thing too. I've done that. Then you freak out. Let's just shut it all down for good. Number 7, Kerry Von Erich's foot amputation. In 1986, Kerry Von Erich lost his foot after a motorbike accident. Sheesh. The rumor was that he was actually going to be okay until he carried on wrestling with this injury when doctors decided it had to go. For some reason following this, Father Fritz swore the family to secrecy like it was some sort of weird foot movie. Due to the wrestling industry, the rumors started to swell, but it is sports entertainment, so nobody knew for sure, until Kerry came up against Colonel Diebers in 1988. Because as he was working over Von Erich's leg, Kerry's boot came off and everybody could see that all that was on the other end was a sock. Cue people going crazy. Vince McMahon jumped on this too, and in true Carney fashion tried to get Kerry banned from wrestling via the Illinois State Athletic Commission. He's already lost his foot, leave him alone. Do not forget though, this meant none of the other wrestlers knew either, leaving some of his former opponents to be like, good grief, I worked that guy when he had no foot. That shouldn't be a sentence. So it really was quite the ruse, and who knows, if the boot had never come off, this could have been nothing more than a myth. But no, it was real and crazy. Number 6, Vince Russo let slip. He's helping TNA. Now this was dumb, wasn't it? The man who loved to swerve and famously said the worst part of wrestling is the wrestling, Vince Russo was not the most popular guy at the turn of the century, as many people felt his mad booking was responsible for the death of WCW. He's not solely to blame, but he is part of it. Despite that, TNA still hired him, and all of a sudden on TV we were getting all these weird reality-based stories and people saying offensive things. So either this was Russo or somebody was aping his style. The promotion denied this, and Vince said he was not part of the show, until Mike Johnson of PW Cider got an email from Russo which talked about him working at, you guessed it, TNA. Of course he meant to send this to Mike Tenay, although I don't really know how you make that mistake. Before long we all knew it was bad and it blew up in everybody's face. It was also proof that Russo was in fact in constant touch with the dirt sheets, even though he claimed to hate them. That is wrestling summed up right there. Number 5, Triple H accidentally reveals a commentator is fired. Do you remember Jimmy Smith? He was the lead announcer on Raw for a while, and he did alright. I quite liked him, but one day he was just gone. I didn't need to sound that surprised because WWE does this all the time. Turnover is a little bit nuts. Smith did an interview with SiriusXM after this and actually revealed he knew his firing was coming based off an interaction with none other than Triple H. Because as we were gearing up for the Extreme Rules pay-per-view, Smith went to the game and tried to get a line cleared for the show, when he was told that maybe he should go and give that to Michael Cole instead. Surprise, surprise, alarm bells started to ring. That's an odd reply to get. Turns out Jimmy was a savant, as 48 hours later he was gone. That couldn't have been a nice 2 days for Jimbo. And to this day, we don't really know why WWE said goodbye. They just did. That's what they do. Number 4, Chris Benoit's behavior. So I don't like talking about this for the obvious reasons. The Chris Benoit tragedies are just horrendous, and it's why I don't think we should talk about his career or matches. If you commit such heinous crimes, nothing else should matter regardless of the reasons. That's just my opinion either way. When the news did break in 2007 though, the world was stunned both inside the wrestling bubble and outside of it too. This was worldwide news. Many claimed sheer shock that someone like Benoit could do such a thing, until we did get to 2010, when Paul London and Brian Kendrick did that infamous shoot interview. They saw this differently. Because while they didn't say as much, the pair chatted about some truly intense behaviour of Benoit, including London insinuating Chris pressured him into sexual encounters with a waitress and he would watch. They were also very vocal about not being all that surprised and told some truly worrying tales about them at a restaurant, and this also extends to JBL and William Regal, allegedly. Many people have seen Regal's appearance during the Chris Benoit Raw tribute show, where he's very notably focused on the man's in-ring abilities as opposed to anything else. The word is, before the camera started to roll, Bradshaw asked William if he thought Benoit had anything to do with the murders. There's also reports that Chris was not doing all that well in the run-up to these, and that his relationship with wife Nancy was not in a good place. I suppose we'll never know for sure, but the idea that nobody saw this coming doesn't feel as cut and dry as maybe it once did. Number 3, the plane ride from hell was not a one-off. So we remember this even more now due to that Dark Side of the Ring episode, and it was not good times. The worst part is, while this outing pulled in headlines, it wasn't exactly totally crazy, because this sort of thing was happening a lot. Tommy Dreamer during that show even said this was sort of normal for the time, and while non-wrestlers would find this crazy, inside the bubble it was just another day, and I don't think that should be the case. Former WWE referee Mike Chioda also talked about similar incidents, whereas Rob Van Dam has some harrowing tales about drugging women and what would follow afterwards. It's beyond words. Sadly, the true dark side of the ring is that wrestling for a time was lost in these kind of acts, and it's why today is so much better. The backstage culture was incredibly out of control and just not cool. Even Marty Jannetty, who wasn't even with the company at the time, admitted he wasn't shocked to hear such tales. That was just the way he remembered things, so honestly, thank goodness it's all changed. Video games for life. Number 2, The Ultimate Warrior gets worse. No matter what your thoughts on The Ultimate Warrior were when you were a child, there are a lot of stories today that'll just break your fandom. The most popularized of these are his awful speeches where he went after the LGBTQ community, and let's just make it clear, whatever your sexuality, gender, race, color, you are welcome in the wrestling world. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. We do go back to Marty Jannetty with this one, as he talked about Jim Hellwig during a shoot interview. My word, the accusation was basically illegal. Now, we do have to make it clear this is just Marty's takes on things, and we don't know for sure. He claimed in the 1980s during a flight, the boys gave some college kids GHB on a flight, and when one woman passed out, the warrior twisted the shib out of her nipples. That is a quote from one Marty Jannetty. Now, you just don't do that for obvious reasons, although to be honest with you, these shoot interviews are out of control in the modern day because, number 1, the 2000 shoot interviews. Yep. There's loads of disturbing info in here. If you were around at the turn of the millennium, you know that the shoot interview became very popular, as many a wrestler realized they could earn a pretty penny by revealing their stories to a wider audience. One of these featured Brutus the Barber Beefcake as he chatted to Sean Oliver about a so-called wrestling legend who would drug women, having his way with them before kicking them out of the locker room. For some reason, while recounting this, Brutus is just laughing away. I mean, it's not funny. It's only fair to mention that Beefcake is not a reliable source, as he has exaggerated to Hulk Hogan levels over the years. As we've already talked about, both Marty Jannetty and RVD claim to have had similar tales. Missy Hyatt too has echoed this, and when you do go through these chats, the same story comes up and again, with the narrator not realizing that this is truly horrendous to even recount. So I say again, give me wrestlers playing video games and mucking around on TikTok over this. To keep it simple, it's just not right.
So I think it goes without saying, but Reddit is a very strange, weird and wonderful place, but mostly weird. And when it comes to wrestling, there have been many posts about some obscure, mind-blowing facts that you truly wouldn't believe, but yet somehow appear to be true. As a time capsule for everything good and bad about wrestling, Reddit is the promised land for those looking to unearth some crazy facts about the sport that we love so much. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 weirdest, mind-blowing wrestling facts according to Reddit. Number 10. Steve Blackman nearly died of malaria before his WWE run. Now, Steve Blackman was, and still is, hard as but he was given one of the toughest battles of his life long before he broke into the WWE in late 1997. Ironically, it was during his first attempt at Titan superstardom that a health concern outside of the ring almost took away his livelihood. After working for Stampede Wrestling in the mid-1980s, he was on the verge of scoring a full-time contract following some brief television appearances until he contracted near-fatal malaria during a tour of South Africa in 1989. It left him confined to a bed for almost 2 years. With the damage done to his health, size and mobility enough to put paid to his hopes and dreams of ever making it in such a physically demanding trade. Until he did, because like I said before, he's hard as and wasn't going to take no for an answer. In some sweet circular synergy, it was Stampede cornerstones Owen Hart and Brian Pillman that helped him back through the door. Number 9. Nobody has held the original ECW World Heavyweight title and a major WWE World Heavyweight title. There's always a caveat with belt stats, but this one only makes the slice of trivia all that more appealing. WWE World Heavyweight title refers to any iteration of the company's top strap over the last several years, whilst the original ECW World Heavyweight title of course discounts everything post-2006. It's an important distinction to make, if only to rule out the first dual title holder, Rob Van Dam. But despite a who's who of industry icons serving as ECW's top star, none were ever selected to steward things in the WWE. That includes such luminaries as Don Muraco, Terry Funk and Taz, as well as a host of hardcore icons that Vince McMahon just seemingly never saw as one of his top stars. It makes for slightly damning reading, if not all that shocking. Shane Douglas, arguably the most famous franchise player in the Philadelphia outfit's history, was reduced to the role of a cartoonish teacher during his short stint. Number 8. Taylor Swift used to babysit for Jeff Jarrett. As comfortably the biggest country music turned mainstream megastar in music history, Jeff Jarrett knows a thing or two about making niche concerns huge. Taylor Swift, to a lesser extent, probably understands this, and it explains why the two interacted on a close personal level earlier in Swift's career. As Jarrett explained in an interview, "She had a friend in the family and we became family friends. She's in the community. When Mine came out, she came over to the house and Jeremy Borash and we were having a creative meeting downstairs. Taylor would come over and get the girls to take them back to her house and they bake cookies and all that kind of stuff. One day Taylor brought over Joe Jonas. The Mine video is so creative, my daughter Jacqueline looked like a little Taylor. We were out on the lake, Taylor pulled up and as bold as she always is, was just like, I want Jacqueline in the video. Okay? We flew up to Maine where we shot the video, had to turn over your cell phone on set and all that stuff. It was a good experience for the kids. Ain't she great?" Number 7. Jinder Mahal's single WWE Championship reign is longer than all 4 of Edge's combined. The numbers don't lie, do they? And they spell disaster for Jinder Mahal at Sacrifice. If only Scott Steiner were cutting a promo on the modern-day Maharaja back when he was the WWE Champion in 2017. The reign might have actually stood half a chance. Alas, the run will be remembered for what it was, a panicked multifarious failure that served only to devalue a belt already suffering questionable prestige. Although it typically wouldn't be, this quirky statistic is unfortunately most definitely one at Mahal's expense rather than that of the rated R superstar. Short title tenures often doom the holder, but not here. Mahal's 170 days were painfully unremarkable, and when they weren't boring, they were too offensive to be genuinely heated. Contrast this with some legacy-enhancing runs against John Cena and others for an Edge character still very much on his ascendancy in the WWE at the time, and it is crystal clear who got the better deal. Number 6. Wrestler talk show grifts. Various. Now the image on screen that you'll see is a young Mickie James, innocently peering down the lens of a school photograph, not realizing that one day she'd be a contrast of herself, for a show profiling women that went from nerd to knockout in front of fictional school friends. This was the story of her appearance on a 2000 episode of Jenny Jones that's available to watch thanks to multiple uploaders on YouTube. It's extremely, of its time in the worst possible ways, but at least gives you a semblance of agency to James as a budding pro wrestler. She wasn't the only one to give that era's crash TV circuit a try, according to some well-informed Redditors. Apparently Justin Roberts was on Jerry Springer playing a guy whose girlfriend was cheating on him with his own sister. OK Volume 1 noted that Bill Dundee and JC Ice were on Springer pretending Jamie was pimping out some kid, and user Mr. Darks recalled watching New Jack pretend to be a guidance counselor on the Jenny Jones show. Wrestling and daytime scandal shows have never been so thematically close as they were back then. It's a wonder that almost every major name ever scribbled down on a format by Vince Russo didn't ply this trade at least once. Number 5. Jeff Jarrett almost took a Val Kilmer Hollywood role. Back to Double J again with comments from a Cheap Heat interview, and big shout out to Fightful for the transcript, that made it to Reddit about an intriguing nearly moment for the King of the Mountain. He said, "That opportunity literally dropped out of thin air sitting in my desk. I'll never net because I've told this story. I've got an email. They said, hey, Val Kilmer was supposed to read for this part, but he dropped out. They're like, would you like to read for this? I'm like, yeah, sure. I thought it was a joke because it was a cold email that I received. Anyway, I did the read in my office and sent them back, and you got it, and they say, oh yeah, Selena Gomez is in the movie and Vanessa, all of these stars, and look, I've got 5 kids. 4 of them are girls, and you know, years ago, Disney Channel and Selena and all that. I was very excited that they were going to get this opportunity to meet her, but it was a fun part, but I don't have plans to go off to Hollywood. Read that, no plans, as being just yet. Number 4. Christian Cage was Nick Khan's first wrestling client. Now most notably tied to one of the most ruthless cost-cutting endeavors in WWE history, current company president Nick Khan wasn't entirely brand new to the world that he entered in 2020. According to Redditor Cactus Mac, Christian Cage was Nick Khan's first client as a sports agent, helped negotiate his move to TNA, and was friends with Samoa Joe around the same time. The specific wrestler details aren't the easiest to track down on Google, which is as good a barometer as any of how true they may be, but some of Khan's employment history is thanks to his WWE.com profile, and the following passage would at the very least match up with the timeline of Cage's departure to Orlando, which reads, Khan, a former practicing attorney, transitioned to international creative management in 2006, where he launched their sports media department and represented the biggest names in sports broadcasting. He's apparently also lifelong friends with The Rock, further tethering him to a world that he's rapidly shook up. Number 3. Vince McMahon versus burritos, snow cones, social media, media and his own staff. It's an oldie but a goodie at this point, but Vince McMahon chowing down on a steak wrap and not realizing that the rest of the world knew it as something different remains as delightful as the food is delicious, as were these other morsels shared by a user known as Moss-Covered Gradunza, with a loose connection to the original source. And here we go. This is what they had to say, just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. I'll respond with further when I recall more of them. The steak wrap / burrito is absolutely true. He would apparently eat them all the time and never ever call it a burrito. He said he never heard the snow cone story before. Doesn't mean it isn't true, but he had personally never heard it. When it came to social media, as it was growing, he always wanted The Miz to become one of the first guys they were really promoting. It sounded like he had a lot of faith in The Miz to be a guy who could run it. For many other wrestlers, he was indifferent about social media use. This was years and years ago, so obviously things have changed a bit. He very much did fire people on a whim. Some my old boss felt were justified, others were not. And then concluded by saying, keep in mind these are not first-hand accounts from me, they all come from my former boss. And I realise this means nothing coming from a random stranger on the internet, but the person I used to work for very much did work on this for WWE and Vince. Number 2, WrestleMania 19's main event is the only one to feature both wrestlers using their real names. As nice as it is weird, this cute trivia note adds yet another layer to the neck-breaking onion that is / was the terrifying conclusion to the WrestleMania 19 event. Brock Lesnar's shooting star press was the headline coming out, replacing the panic around Kurt Angle's frazzled fame on the way in. With very little remembered about an excellent match between two ex-amateurs who desperately wanted to prove who was the best to turn pro. The fact that both worked with their real names is such a neat addendum to that. Angle was an ultra-established sports entertainment polymath by 2003, and Lesnar wasn't far behind him as both the next big thing and the Beast, but going by their own monikers linked each man to a simpler but no less skilled time. The record is soon to hit its 20th anniversary with no end in sight, not least with the likes of Roman Reigns and Becky Lynch sure to be on at least one side of the ring for years to come. And number 1, Finn Balor's 6 minutes of magic. It apparently took just 6 minutes for New Japan Pro Wrestling bosses to make up their mind on whether or not to sign the future Finn Balor. It was after Fergal Devitt had worked this match that NJPW scouts allegedly got him an offer to attend their dojo, thus opening the door for him to kick off a legendary and life-changing run for the King of Sports. This was confirmed by Reddit user and former wrestler Nikita Alanov, Soviet shooter, who added some additional color. Holy shit, I didn't know there was actually a decent video of this show floating around. I worked this show, might have even been the match right after this. Dave Marquez was there representing NJPW, and the showcase match from the Inoki Dojo was Alex Kozlov versus Tommy Chang. As far as I know, Devitt was the only person to get an offer to go to the dojo directly, but Chad Allegra, Chance Profit, and myself all got offers to go to the dojo in LA.
Who doesn't like a good WWE documentary? Always well produced and usually giving you a glimpse at life behind the scenes is an area the company has often thrived in. You do have to remember they're only going to give you their version of events, which sometimes are not exactly on the money, but if you treat it as entertainment, you'll be fine. On occasion though, small bits of info do slip through the cracks, and often it gives you far more insight than anybody meant to put out there. So I am Simon from WhatCulture, please do hit that subscribe button, and this is 10 wrestling documentaries that accidentally uncovered major scoops. Number 10, the creative process. Now obviously learning about how wrestling stories come together is very common for most WWE documentaries, but this one was a little bit different. Happening in the 2020 network special Live Forever, we were treated to the life and times of Liv Morgan and how literally nothing is ever set in stone. For example, you see Morgan warming up for a match with Ember Moon, which then gets cancelled seconds before it's meant to go on. Understandably, the former Riot Squad member is baffled. This then continues as Liv is continually brought to TV only to learn the powers that be have nothing for her, and the whole thing is a bit like watching a wrestler get more and more confused. I didn't know what was going on, and I wasn't anywhere near it. So I'm pretty sure this was not the idea of the documentary, but it absolutely will be your takeaway. Number 9, Vince McMahon chats to Keith Lee. Given what has happened to Keith Lee in the WWE now, this one will raise your eyebrow. Once again, straight from the network, we see McMahon chatting to Lee, telling him that he can see the potential and together they're going to zoom to the moon. Keith is then shown getting all pumped up and ready to run through a wall, and within 1 calendar year, he had been released. Sheesh. If we had tried and it had all gone wrong, then fair enough, but the whole Keith Lee experiment on the main roster was mad. It seemed like management wasn't happy with his physique, so put him in a singlet, and then he would win and lose and win and lose, even when it came to the most random of matches. For example, he defeated Randy Orton and then lost to nearly everybody else. He then became the Bearcat, and it really did feel like we were taking everything that made him unique and undoing it. It wasn't helping. An extended health scare seemed to be the end of it all, which brings up its own questions, but with that in mind, at least Lee recovered from that. This is what really matters, but yeah, this should serve as some sort of reminder that you probably shouldn't take Vinnie Mac at his word. Number 8, Vince McMahon and Kevin Owens. Well, this one will make your toes curl. Some say it was done for the cameras, but that seems generous, and if you want to see it for yourself, just tune in to the Kevin Owens 24/7 special. For you do indeed see KO walking back past the boss after his WrestleMania 33 match with Chris Jericho, and when he asks McMahon if they're cool, Vince says no. He also looked like he's about to murder someone. And you can debate whether this bout was any good or not, but the sheer dismissal of a guy who more often than not delivers will make your heart sink. It's not like Owens gets any other proper feedback either. It's just a shake of the head, and we are done. Kevin probably spent the rest of the night thinking about it too. That just makes me sad in my tum-tum. Number 7, Vince McMahon and Tom McGee. This was treated as the holy grail for years. An apparent match where Bret Hart proved he was the best ever when he went toe-to-toe with newcomer Tom McGee and made him look so good, Vince McMahon thought he'd found the next Hulk Hogan. This was mostly because McGee not only had the body but some serious agility, and it impressed the boss so much he began doing backflips. He didn't care how inexperienced Tom was. They were going to strap the rocket to him. So when this fabled contest eventually appeared on the WWE Network and we all tuned in, it was quite clear that McMahon was looking in the wrong direction. I mean, fair play to McGee as it takes two to tango, but it was obvious that the Hitman was the star here because he knew how to make anybody look good. He just played to their strengths without putting any of his own ego into it. The main takeaway was even back in 1986, the chairman of the board could easily be distracted by bodies, and thankfully that's changed these days. And if you believe that, you have not been watching. Number 6, The Real Ultimate Warrior. Over to the A&E run of WWE documentaries that aired in 2020 now, in particular the episode on The Ultimate Warrior. It's long been known that the former Jim Hellwig was a controversial cat to say the least, but seeing the man lose his cool during a pseudo promo was something else. It all began when a child approached the Warrior in an airport wanting an autograph. Quite wrongly, the Ultimate One told him to flub off, and when this incident escalated, the one-time WWE champion was told by McMahon to record an apology video. For some reason, the Warrior didn't want to do this and pitched a fit during the whole thing, forcing Vince to try and coddle him like a child, and yes, you see this happening in the documentary. You can also hear McMahon's voice off-screen trying to comfort and coerce Hellwig into doing it, and the whole thing is so uncomfortable and it's so damn weird. McMahon even describes the whole thing as a work, which makes it even more squeamish. I'm not really sure this is the way you should be treating your fans. Number 5, the RVD documentary changes direction. Rob Van Dam's Headstrong documentary by Reels was meant to show the former wrestler making his way into stand-up comedy. It sounded like reality TV at its best, and who knows, maybe the master of the 5-star frog splash had the chops to make it in a different industry. As it turned out, we're never gonna know. Because the big spin with this is that Rob was suffering so badly from the effects of CTE, it soon became clear that his memory isn't what it once was, right down to not being able to remember the jokes he was going to tell. It soon came out that this was also the case when he was in Impact Wrestling 2, as he struggled to recall spots and the whole vehicle took an unexpected turn. It's all speculation at best, as you can only diagnose CTE after studying someone's brain, but the evidence is there, and seeing it happen in front of your eyes is heartbreaking. You'd have to figure this is a result of the many, many horrendous chair shots RVD took throughout the years, and to see this play out, just prepare yourself. Number 4, Wrestling with Shadows. Another documentary that just switches gears halfway through filming. Every wrestling fan needs to see this. Wrestling with Shadows was meant to be a love letter to the retirement of Bret the Hitman Hart, and then soon became an essential companion to the Montreal Screwjob, and just how dirty a lot of people in WWE did the Hitman. I mean, this has everything. Not only do you hear Vince McMahon agree to the DQ finish at the Survivor Series 1997, which obviously didn't happen, but you see the main players all deny it. Shawn Michaels claims he was also duped, as does Triple H, and as we know today, they were all involved. It is simply astonishing to witness, especially as Hart's then wife Julie takes all these guys to task, and seeing firsthand how much this affects Bret is no fun. It's quite the reveal, given that this was never meant to cover such things. So if you have not, go and see this today. you will be slack-jawed the entire time. Number 3, Neville is done. Happening during an episode of Ride Along, this series quickly became a window into how bizarre the world of WWE is. And that's kind of amazing given it was just meant to be wrestlers driving from town to town with a camera in their face. But not only did one episode result in Bayley explaining to Fox Sports that indeed, yes, they all pay for their own travel, but it also underlined that Neville was not a happy camper. Airing in 2017 and built around Sasha Banks and the Hugger, the pair spar Neville at a rest stop, so decide to take a selfie with him. Without missing a beat, the soon-to-be Pac asks if this is for Ride Along, and when it's confirmed, he says that the show can flub off. Unsurprisingly, that same month he left the company because as already stated, he was not happy at all. Number 2, The Dark Side of the Ring. Vice's wrestling series does exactly what it says on the tin. Some episodes are genuinely quite harrowing. Even then, though, it still manages to ask even bigger questions of the industry, often leaving us fans to wonder what the hell is going on, because none of this sounds any good. One that saw heads roll was focused on the now infamous Plane Ride from Hell, a flight that has often been pitched as a comedic frat road trip as opposed to what it really was, totally inappropriate. The revelation saw Tommy Dreamer and Ric Flair put into the corner, and the fallout underlined the fact that this wasn't an isolated incident. Just go and find some Brutus the Barber Beefcake shoot interviews where he essentially says drugging people's drinks was not just to make fools of other wrestlers. It is just horrible from top to bottom, and all the proof you need that the locker room of today is far better than it was, and any calls to return to that are simply stupid. Number 1, Dean Ambrose becomes Jon Moxley on WWE TV. Dean Ambrose left the WWE in 2019 before joining AEW as Jon Moxley. It was a defining moment in All Elite Wrestling, but the transformation actually happened in 2018 during the Chronicle Network documentary, and watching it now is quite frankly amazing. Shot half in kayfabe and half in reality, it covered Ambrose's return from injury and subsequent heel turn. Aside from the struggles of how bad his woes were to get back to the ring, you get a visual representation of how confused he was by everything WWE was doing with his character, and that really he doesn't want to be there anymore. On more than one occasion, he snaps as yet more daft storylines are thrown his way, and if you want to see the birth of Mox, watch this. And that's not an exaggeration either. Clearly realizing he's not going to be with WWE much longer, he just throws all caution to the wind. It is absolutely fascinating to witness. If you have the power, you're going to use it. Just ask He-Man. It is human nature though, because it allows you to build a protective bubble around yourself. And let's face it, we all get called morons on Twitter every day, so you may as well take the positives where you can get it. But I'm Simon from WhatCulture, please do hit that subscribe button. And yes, this is 10 rare wrestling contract clauses you never knew. Number 10, Triple H can't look weak. Now this is an interesting one as it is to do with the video game industry, and at the time, I was working in said video game industry. And did anybody ever tell me not to take a screenshot or video of Triple H in a weakened position in-game? No. But were some? Yes. It happened in 2008 after a private memo was leaked between WWE and then developer THQ, which was sent to the press for the upcoming SmackDown vs. Raw. It said that not only should publications not focus on blood and weapons as WWE was moving in a more PG direction, but that Trips shouldn't be shown in a defenseless or vulnerable position. It was a bad move for many reasons, because I doubt anyone would have done this to begin with, but as soon as the wider community found out about it, you can just imagine the footage that found its way online and everywhere else. Triple H's digital avatar had everything done to him, including performing an entrance like one of the divas. Sometimes it's best to just stay quiet. Number 9, CM Punk gets his theme song changed. We all remember way back in 2011 when CM Punk took the biggest swing of his career and became a megastar. He cut the pipe bomb promo, got a lot of people interested in wrestling again, which was kind of ironic as Punk felt like he could do all of this because he was on his way out the door. His contract was expiring, and as far as he was concerned, he was done. This all went so well though, WWE realized they couldn't let that happen, so whatever negotiations were going on at the time took a new turn. It put Punk in the driver's seat essentially, and while I'm sure he definitely got a bunch more cash, he also got the company to splash out some more money to secure the rights for Living Colour's Cult of Personality, a theme song he had used for years prior to joining. Licensing music does not come cheap, and it was a smart move by Punk, as it did make him feel like a bigger deal. For some reason, real music always does. CM even confirmed all of this in a tweet in 2020 when talking about the track and saying that in 2011, he gave WWE, and I quote, "no choice." Can't argue with this. It was a tremendous call. Number 8, Randy Savage gets WCW to sign his brother. Well, that's nice, isn't it? While many remember Lanny Poffo for his run as Leaping Lanny in the 80s or the Beverly Brothers manager in the 90s where he was the genius, it's fair to say he never reached the same heights as his brother, aka the Macho Man Randy Savage. The pair were exceptionally close though, so when Randy was signed to WCW in 1994, one of the conditions of his deal was that they hire Lanny too. Be still my warm and fuzzy heart. The Macho Man even had a plan for his sibling and encouraged him to bleach his hair and get a tan so that they could turn him into the modern-day Gorgeous George. Randy would then tell Lanny to stay in this shape until the phone rang, but it never did. That's right, WCW solely did this to please the former WWF champion, but never actually used Lanny to do much of anything. He sat at home for 4 years collecting his check, and it seems like World Championship Wrestling would have served itself a lot better by just sending a truckload of cash to Lanny's house and still allowing him to work elsewhere. Number 7, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall's Favored Nation clause. And talking about throwing around money, when Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were brought into the promotion in 1996, they weren't mucking around. They knew that WCW needed them badly, so just made a bunch of demands, and as we know, got them, including the favored nations. What does that mean? Simple. If management was going to continue to be this careless with their finances and hand over massive contracts, every time they did, Nash and Hall's deals as a minimum would be increased to match this. So yes, in short, no one in the promotion could ever make more money than them. Now this type of clause is used in a lot of entertainment contracts, but it was Kevin and Scott who popularized it in wrestling. Other wrestlers heard about this too, which is why it was time to chat to the likes of Goldberg and Bret Hart about new deals. They would want a slice of this as well. Talking about shooting yourself in the foot, it would mean you take on a new piece of talent, and all of a sudden everybody else's money would increase. Number 6, Brock Lesnar is not full-time. Brock Lesnar's deals have annoyed a lot of fans over the years, and I never really understood why. Who would turn it down? Would you like a lot of money to do something cool? No thanks. Barry on Twitter may yell at me. And yes, some controversies have come to light over the years, especially when Brock was busted by USADA for testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs after he had returned to UFC for a fight against Mark Hunt. Lesnar had arranged the deal when he was still employed under Vince McMahon, leading to many individuals rightly asking, well, how did this happen? Because how had he been passing WWE wellness tests? The answer was he wasn't, because he didn't even have to take them. The official statement from WWE read, WWE's talent wellness program does not apply to part-time performers such as Brock Lesnar, which was quite damning all things considered. Given this was 2016 though, today nobody cares. Number 5, the Demon has to headline. What was WCW thinking in 1999? Well, they weren't. They just did things because they had so much success and money, and they thought they could. This, for some reason, also included starting a working relationship with the band Kiss. Now look, I love Kiss. I will enjoy Crazy, Crazy Night till the day I vanish into the abyss, but I did not need to see a character in wrestling known as the Kiss Demon. I don't make the decisions, however, and we did get this with Dale Torborg being given the role. He would dress like the band and I guess pretend he was one of them? I don't know. The best part of the contract, however, was that Gene Simmons et al. Told WCW this gimmick had to headline at least one pay-per-view. And of course, everybody knew that would be a terrible idea, meaning management had to do backflips to justify it legally. So at Super Bowl 2000, they had a special main event where the Demon took on the Wall. It was fourth on the card, but as it had been dubbed a special main event, lawyers, I suppose, decided that it counted. This was ridiculous, and so was the idea. Number 4, Bruce Pritchard's podcast. The last 5 years or so for Bruce Pritchard have been quite remarkable. He was let go from WWE in 2008 after more than 20 years of service and hadn't been heard of much since. When his friend Conrad Thompson convinced him to do a podcast, however, it caught fire, became a success, and seemingly made all involved a lot of money. It got the attention of WWE in 2019 that he was back in the game, as they brought him back in as a creative consultant before hiring him full-time as the executive director of both Raw and SmackDown. What a comeback that is! The issue, of course, was what would happen to the podcast. So Pritchard had it written into his new deal that he was allowed to do it as and when his schedule allowed. The proviso was that he couldn't talk about anything current, which is fair as that would be sharing company secrets, so this is how that still exists, whereas other talents had third-party projects taken away. He got in ahead of the game. Number 3, creative control. I never understand why anybody would agree to this. It is the equivalent of letting the inmates run the asylum, but hey, it happened a lot. Even Arn Anderson has said that the term creative control is a nasty one. Essentially, it allows a wrestler to control their own destinies, as it did with Hulk Hogan when he signed with WCW. In the deal, it stated that Hogan had approval over the outcome of all wrestling matches in which he appears, wrestles and performs, with approval not to be unreasonably withheld. I would guess this is why Starrcade 1997's finish got changed into the horror show it ended up being. As we know, Bret Hart also had this written into his final WWE contract, and look how that turned out. Even though the Hitman had reasonable creative control during the last 30 days with the company, Vince McMahon didn't like what he said, so he just did what he wanted anyway. Unsurprisingly, this clause has never been put into a WWE contract again, and it's likely for the best. Number 2, Scott Steiner is silenced. Nobody is less afraid to say things than Scott Steiner. It is almost unreal how much he will share and how much of an opinion he will give. In short, he don't give a hoot. I mean, he once said that people he doesn't like know that he doesn't like them, which is why when he left 2NA in 2012, he almost instantly tore into them online. He ragged on the company, on Eric Bischoff, on Hulk Hogan, before a lawyer called him up and told him to stop. And why? Because TNA had been super smart. They knew Steiner was a pressure cooker, so had it written into his deal that when he did leave, he couldn't make any disparaging comments. Scott was then told he'd have to pay monetary damages and was never allowed to mention them again. Big Papa Pump then sued them back because of course he did, and based it on the fact that he had competed against an under-the-influence Jeff Hardy and TNA had allowed it. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2016, which is a small shame. Who wouldn't want to see Scott Steiner in court? Number 1, The Ultimate Warrior's comic book. The Ultimate Warrior had a reputation of being hard to work with Jim Ross stating on his Grilling JR podcast that it was next to impossible. It's why he came and went from the WWF constantly, including a 20-year absence where neither wanted anything to do with the other. When they were in this on-again, off-again relationship though, Warrior had a list of instructions that the company was going to have to follow. For starters, he only wanted to work 14 days per month, and more oddly, he wanted WWF to help publish his comic book, which is truly bizarre if you've ever seen it. It focuses on something called Destructity and treats Santa Claus in ways that we should never repeat. The deal would also give Jim Hellwig the Warrior trademark, and as a make nice, he said the company would get a 12% share of the comic. Thanks. This all blew up again soon after and was a talking point, as the Ultimate One did take the WWF to court to try and get the rights to his name. I'll be honest with you, it all sounds really exhausting.
If you're the kind of general knowledge lover who just can't get through a night out without informing your long-suffering non-wrestling fan mates which WWE wrestler won the most matches over the last 12 months, spoiler, it was Bianca Belair because of course it was, then do I have the entirely unnecessary collection of WWE details for you. Gareth here from WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 unnecessary WWE details you need to know. Number 10, Edge is the only multiple Royal Rumble winner not to win his Mania match. Winning the 30-person over-the-top rope Royal Rumble has become an honor almost more impressive than picking up a world title strap over the last few decades. But coming out on top in multiple Rumbles is about as monumental as it gets, with only a couple of stars holding that spectacular record in WWE history. With numerous cracks at winning the big one at the show of shows then, it seems logical to assume that each and every one of the multiple-time winners have all been able to walk out of WrestleMania with a World Championship belt on at least one occasion then, right? Well, unfortunately for the Rated R Hall of Famer himself, despite winning both the 2010 and 2021 matches, Edge was never able to translate those huge Rumble victories into a win on the grandest stage of them all, making him the only multiple-time winner of the match to not win any of his subsequent World Title Mania encounters. Number 9, the End of Days song was Jim Johnston's last WWE theme. If there's an old-school WWE theme song that you hold particularly dear to your heart, then there's a pretty good chance the mighty Jim Johnston was behind it, helping forge everything from Kurt Angle's epic You Suck tune to Stone Cold Steve Austin's absolutely iconic Glass match. Johnston had one hell of a successful hit rate. However, the longtime WWE composer was ultimately released in 2017, bringing the end to his days creating unquestionable wrestling music magic. So it was somewhat appropriate that Johnston's final WWE theme came in the form of Baron Corbin's The End of Days banger. The song possessed quite a few layers, with Jim's anger at many of his ideas being squashed by the company around the time, and his eventual bowing out of the promotion both being present in Corbin's epic theme. And it's safe to say the various pieces of often forgettable music accompanying the current generation of full-time performers nowadays hasn't been anywhere near the level of the sort of instant classic routinely churned out by the mighty Johnston. Number 8, WWE have never had a a men's world champion born in the 90s on the main roster. If you needed a piece of evidence to highlight just how old WWE's current main roster lineup is at this moment in time, then the realization that the promotion hasn't actually possessed a single men's world champion born in the 1990s will likely do the trick. In fact, the most recent birth of a main roster WWE male singles champ was Austin Theory, popping out in 1997. Away from Theory though, the likes of Alexa Bliss, Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley did all manage to lift a women's world title after being born in 1991, 1994 and 1996 respectively. Sasha Banks and Paige also won a WWE women's title after both being born in 1992. But with the likes of AEW, Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling all boasting at least one male world champion who was born in the last 30 years or so, the fact WWE is still yet to achieve this feat is a little bit worrying. Number 7, Rick Steiner has the best win percentage in WWE history from stars with over 25 matches. When it comes to performers who have wrestled at least 25 bouts for the sports entertainment giant, Rick Steiner actually sits at the very top of the win percentage pile. With a staggering 92.64% victory rate in his 68 matches for the company, one half of the legendary Steiner Brothers squad may be known more for his WCW exploits, but that impressive record is still one that even the rather dominant Ronda Rousey hasn't been able to conquer in recent times. The one-time UFC bantamweight champion holds an 83.69% win rate on the site. Rick's brother Scott still boasts a pretty commendable 77.6% victory percentage, but Braun's daddy is still head and shoulders above the rest when it comes to notching up WWE Ws. Number 6, the NXT UK Championship never changed hands in the UK. Sticking with Braun Breaker's dominant run on black and gold television, the biggest dog in NXT's eventual besting of Tyler Bate at last year's Worlds Collide resulted in the unification of the NXT and NXT UK championships. The end of all things NXT UK actually brought with it a rather intriguing statistic. In the wake of the first ever NXT UK champion being crowned in Blackpool back in 2017, that strap never actually changed hands on British soil from that moment forward. That's right, over the course of its 5-year existence on WWE programming, the black and gold spin-off title was won by everyone from Gunter to Butch when they had other names. However, each of those victories over the defending champ came in the United States at various takeovers or specials. Even when Bate did manage to pick up his second NXT UK title win over in London last year, the title had been vacated beforehand, meaning the prior champ still wasn't technically defeated on the July 7th, 2022 NXT UK show. Number 5, only one woman has waited longer than a day to cash in Money in the Bank. The fact WWE were wise enough to introduce a women's iteration of the always insane Money in the Bank spectacle was definitely a step in the right direction back in 2017. However, the way the company have ultimately handled their various Miss Money in the Banks hasn't been quite as praiseworthy. It's frankly depressing that outside of Carmella, not a single woman has held onto the guaranteed title shot briefcase for longer than a day. Alexa Bliss cashing in her opportunity 2 hours after picking up the epic victory in 2018 was a fun surprise on the night, admittedly. But going back to that well time and time again, each and every year since, just highlights how little effort and thinking often goes into deciding on who will win the all-important women's case and how they will be built in the aftermath. So fingers crossed Triple H has something more compelling in mind in the wake of this year's UK Money in the Bank PLE, with a long-term briefcase holder feeling like a must. Number 4, Beth Phoenix once pitched to be introduced as Brock Lesnar's sister. Clearly taking inspiration from Brock Lesnar's destructive WWE debut all those years ago, it turns out that eventual multiple-time women's champion Beth Phoenix actually once pitched to become the next big thing. Beth took Michael Hayes to one side during a stint as a WWE extra and proceeded to pitch a detailed storyline that involved her eventually being brought in as Brock Lesnar's sister. As Phoenix hilariously put it, she had zero chill. But you can't knock the ambition on show in the eventual WWE Hall of Famer back in those early days. And you would be lying if you said you wouldn't have lapped up the sight of Beth Lesnar F5ing the division into oblivion throughout the late 2000s. Number 3, The New Day and the Usos are the only teams with multiple SmackDown tag team title reigns. While the Usos may have been able to overtake their longtime rivals when it comes to holding the record of longest reigning male tag champs in WWE history recently, both the Bloodline duo and the New Day still share one particular record that they alone possess. Since being introduced back in 2016, only Jimmy and Jay and Big E, Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods can say they've achieved multiple reigns with the blue straps as a unit. Now sure, the likes of Eric Rowan, the late great Luke Harper, also known as Brody Lee, The Miz and Cesaro have all each amassed multiple reigns with these specific belts too, but they all achieve this feat with different partners. So when it comes to title-winning teams, they just don't get any more prolific than the New Day and the Usos, with the consistent units coming in with a remarkable 7 and 5 reigns respectively. Number 2, Sami Zayn breaks an Ovation record heading into Elimination Chamber 2023. Elimination Chamber 2023 may not have produced the visual many many a vocal Montreal supporter and those passionately screaming for their boy Sami Zayn were hoping for, but it did still boast one hell of a crowd, something that led to a record being broken in the lead up to the epic main event. As the unfortunate challenger himself would reveal during the post-PLE press conference, the amazing ovation the valiant honorary Uce received on the SmackDown before Elimination Chamber in his own backyard was actually the longest in the history of the Bell Center. The awesome visual and sound that met Zayn on the Friday Night Delight the day before this hotly anticipated title challenge was ultimately timed at an astounding 5 minutes 12 seconds by Quebec historian Pat Laprade. And this impressive feat was said to have been longer than everything from Hulk Hogan's ovation in 2002 to Jacques Villeneuve's in November 1997. Number 1, Bianca Belair made her crown jewel gear on the road. On top of being the all-round EST of WWE, Bianca Belair is also up there with a great test when it comes to forging routinely outstanding in-ring gears too. The Raw Women's Champion is actually responsible for stitching and sewing all of the Belair costumes found lighting up the Red Show and PLEs. In fact, heading into last year's Crown Jewel event, Belair was so pushed for time due to her travel schedule that she had no choice but to put the gear she sported in her match against Bayley together on the road. And one of the performers who spotted this absolutely ridiculous level of skill in motion was none other than Kevin Owens himself, who would later class the visual of Belair sewing the gear together by hand on a bus as unreal. Belair would also note that this particular gear suddenly split right down the middle after putting it on when she got to the venue. But being the sensational stitcher she definitely is, Belair proceeded to successfully restitch the outfit just before she made her way out for the Crown Jewel Last Woman Standing bout. What can't she do, eh?
Now, wrestlers tend not to be the most subtle of creatures, bless them. By trade, they are theatrical performers who are meant to project their star power and the stories they tell to the back row of a major arena. And since wrestling is a performance art, it relies heavily upon audience interaction. So therefore, they have to be the opposite of subtle in most cases to get something over. But that doesn't mean that there haven't been secret messages that wrestlers have sent to each other, their loved ones, or even their enemies from time to time. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 secret messages wrestlers sent. Number 10. Triple H has a moment of madness on Twitter. Now, the relationship between Triple H and Vince McMahon became fascinating post-NXT. Prior to that, it felt like they shared the same mind. Triple H did more to put over the hulking Batista than anybody else. He was bang up for burying Daniel Bryan in 2013, and he and Vince shared the same puerile sense of humor. And then Triple H committed the cardinal sin. In a bid to get over by osmosis, he started promoting shorter pro wrestlers and actually pleasing the marks. Vince appeared to be more disgusted with his air by the month as the 2010s faded. Half-hearted debuts on the Raw after WrestleMania evolved into Vince carelessly plugging in a total of 10 wrestlers from NXT across January and February 2019. It was clear that Vince had lost complete faith in the process. He didn't want stars. He didn't think Triple H was capable of building stars. He just wanted bodies under the pretense of refreshing a product so rotten that he had to apologize for how it was in December of 2018. Triple H must have been frustrated, we all thought, and you know what? He was. In May 2019, he was caught on Twitter liking posts critical of McMahon in a telling, passive-aggressive secret hint towards his frustration. At this stage of his corporate career, he had been sent a grapefruit basket and he was spitting out the bloody seeds. Number 9. Various wrestlers say the quiet part loud about the Velveteen Dream. Velveteen Dream was, and you'll understand that care must be taken when phrasing this entry, accused of deeply unsavory sexual advances towards minors in 2020. WWE conducted some sort of internal investigation or other, and it can be inferred from the fact that he continued to appear on television that WWE, at least, found no wrongdoing. We looked into what was there, Triple H told Brent Brookhouse of CBS Sports, and we didn't find anything. Certain hints cropped up that this view wasn't exactly shared by Patrick Clark's peers. At NXT TakeOver Triple X, after Clark was accused amidst the hashtag speaking out moment for indeed a second time, he worked the 5-way ladder match for the North American title. At this phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, various wrestlers cosplayed as fans to emulate something approaching to a normal atmosphere. As such, they were performative, popping for entrances and expressing shock and awe in reaction to high spots. Not so with Clark. Everything he did was met with blanket, seemingly defiant silence. Meanwhile, Rhea Ripley liked a tweet imploring Dream to be fired, and when her partner Adam Cole was announced as working Clark on the December 23, 2020 NXT show, Britt Baker tweeted "lol" with no context. Now, this might be nothing, it should be noted. Perhaps this is all just connecting dots that simply aren't there, but Clark certainly didn't appear to be popular in wrestling circles. Many talents seem to let their feelings be known in subtle, secretive ways. Number 8. Ryback Ryback is self-deprecating. And let's face it, Ryback is a pretty weird guy. He was a weird guy even before he realized that nobody was ever going to hire him and fell off the deep end entirely, but he was also absolute, pure banter. Now, very little of this was on purpose. He's not an intellectual. In one of the funniest pro wrestling stories ever, according to Cody Rhodes and Bryan Danielson, Ryback thought that James Cameron named his movie Terminator 2 because there were two feuding Terminators in it. He was also banter in a deliberate way as well. Referring to himself as the big guy in the third person was funny in a way that is difficult to articulate, and he was prone to a bit of self-deprecation. In addition to admitting to CM Punk that he was dumb as he also sent a sly message to creative with a message on his weight belt in 2016. When he had officially checked out, he printed the pre-show stopper, willfully no-selling the mandated WWE speak of kickoff as a means of sending up his role as yet another demoted main event act that Vince had lost interest in. Number 7. MJF quickly deletes tweet. Now, if it's difficult to ascertain what's exactly going on with MJF, then that is surely the point. In collaboration with Tony Khan, probably pro wrestling's most compelling week-to-week storyteller, he's now cultivating a blurry mystery. He is legitimately pissed off with what he's earning, as he should be, which has informed the realism of the story. He's also so good and such a thoughtful storyteller that his nuance continues to pose questions. He wore a boo-hoo face at Double or Nothing, and it was so glorious in its subtlety that it still feels like he's on the way out, even if ironically, him calling Tony Khan a mark on the next Dynamite was indicative of a repaired relationship. In another beautiful detail, MJF again, provided this is all 100% of work, used technology to advance the arc by tweeting, "I'm running on fumes," a week or so removed from Double or Nothing. He deleted it almost immediately after, knowing that someone, somewhere, would screenshot it for posterity as a candid, secretive post that he thought better of sharing. In short, it's quite brilliant, really. Number 6. Stardust uses subtext. When evolving his post-WWE character, Cody Rhodes was inspired by several industry luminaries. His father was a key influence, of course. He was a very measured and articulate man, drawing indirect inspiration from Nick Bockwinkel, albeit as a face. Cody played a besuited, elegant, timeless figure in contrast to the athletic hybrid superworkers that had almost become indistinguishable from one another. Deep into his AEW run, Cody, by sacrificing his body in an artful, forward-thinking way, operated in a similar way to Mick Foley. He was intent on putting his opponents over and accomplished it with his structural brilliance. He was also, incredibly enough, inspired by Stardust. On February 23, 2015, under the paint with a barely suppressed fury, Cody cut a .com digital exclusive promo away from the scripted confines of TV, bemoaning the state of the industry. It was barely in character. "I want a steak," he ranted, "but before I get it, I have to cut the fat. The slack is Goldust, but he's not alone. The slack is Big Show, is Kane, is Mark Henry. My only word is get the attitude out." More famously, when accepting the challenge of Dustin Rhodes again in 2019, Cody claimed that he was here to kill the Attitude Era. In 2015, he was letting people in on a secret. He was sick to the stomach of WWE recycling its past and was planning right here to change wrestling's future. Number 5. Kenny Omega's incredibly subtle burial of WWE. Now, AEW is less than subtle when aiming digs at WWE. CM Punk enthusiastically and viciously ripped the piss out of WWE, begging fans to attend WrestleMania with buy one get one free offers. Several wrestlers have been glimpsed watching the action on Dynamite from physically impossible angles. The imaginary brass ring is often referred to when an ex-WWE performer reveals their intent to become the next best version of themselves in a promotion that will allow them to be it. And throughout 2021, Kenny Omega had some fun at WWE's expense as well, but it was so subtle that it scanned as a secretive in-joke of sorts. When cutting a promo building his program with Hangman Page, he reminded Tony of a conversation that they'd had earlier today. Schiavone was nonplussed. They hadn't talked. This was Omega covertly burying Michael Cole's very unconvincing signature exposition dump. Omega's patter was so sly in 2021 that it escaped the usual toxic reception because many tribal fans just didn't pick up on it. Perhaps that was the real punchline. His priceless non-sports numbnuts insult didn't get a rise out of the usual dickheads. Number 4. The Big Show is a big softie. Now, the Big Show isn't exactly famed for his loyalty. In fact, he's notorious for turning on a once every few months basis. Whenever John Cena needed a stopgap opponent for a B-level pay-per-view, Show was there. Whenever Vince McMahon wanted an elephantine man to do comedy because it's just simply funnier that way, Show, cosplaying as Hulk Hogan, was there. Whenever a bloodied and pretty much murdered Kurt Angle turned heel and needed his babyface murderer to feud with, Show was there. Whenever that uppity vegan Daniel Bryan needed a punch to the mush, Show was there. Whenever Vince remembered that his fearsome monster could cry because he was a gifted actor by the standards of a wrestling giant, Show was there to turn face. It was a bit like making The Undertaker wrestle in neon yellow, but still, Show was definitely there. But Show is actually fiercely loyal loyal to his wife, and if you've ever spotted him squeezing his arm 3 times, that's Show sending a coded I love you message to her. That's love as ironclad as the contract that he wouldn't shut the up about in 2012. Number 3. Alexa Bliss checks out. According to a report from the reputable Fightful Select last year, Alexa Bliss had vocally expressed her displeasure with the company following the bizarre aimless vignette shot heralding her return to Raw. She actually returned to the Elimination Chamber and missed out on a WrestleMania season. It was reported that she voiced her frustrations directly to Vince McMahon. If this was all hush-hush leaked stuff and not something meant for public consumption, Alexa Bliss said a lot without saying much on the May 23rd edition of Raw Talk on the WWE Network. Now what follows is pure speculation, but the interview conducted by Sarah Schreiber following Alexa's actual return to Raw was deeply awkward. Alexa was asked what it meant to pick up her 3rd straight victory opposite former partner Nikki Ash. Yeah, she said, appearing apprehensive. Nikki is on her own path, she offered up, which was clearly a euphemistic code for she's trapped in a DOA gimmick. And when asked about her own path, in a blink and you'll miss it moment, Alexa looks to the ground. When asked about her momentum, Alexa's eyes darted as she says insincerely that she was really excited about where it takes her. This all might be a reach, but Alexa really does seem to be communicating that she hasn't got a clue what this new character is or what she'll actually be doing next. Number 2. The Undertaker and pals are bonded by ink. Now, the Bone Street Crew has to be the funniest gang name ever. It's even funnier if you try to picture the discussion in which the name was arrived at. We're tight like brothers, we're in a gang, we need to come up with a name, the Undertaker must have said at one point, and his brothers nodded along. Hell yeah, we do. It needs to sound tough, like Henry O. Godwin said. We ain't no namby-bamby click types. I reckon you're right, Taker said. Hey, what about this? We kick ass, right? We break bones. What if we break so many bones that we could make a street full of them? And then Phineas Godwin said, what about the Bone Street Boys? And Taker just spat out his tobacco, disgusted, saying that it sounded like a boy band. But it's all less funny when you recall that bone was actually an informal word for dominoes, which Taker and pals played backstage. But the misspelling of crew is still priceless. And number 1, there was a secret subliminal lyric in the Brood's theme. Now let's face it, the Brood were, on reflection, pretty cringeworthy. However, at the time, and as a lover of floofy shirts, I absolutely love them. Gangrel, Edge, Christian, just look at them rising out of there. I mean, yeah, sure, the spitting of the blood and all the other gimmicks with the vampire stuff, absolute bollocks, but I loved it. Yeah. And you have to admire Gangrel as well, who went the absolute distance and put shoot fangs in his mouth. And the level of commitment wasn't actually merely physical. In a bid to develop a cult following, which was the aim after all, Gangrel, in league with then in-house composer the great Jim Johnston, apparently inserted subliminal backward lyrics into the stable's entrance theme. He said, if you have the right skills and technology to play it backwards, it says, I buried Paul, walk with me. Gangrel said that Johnston's love of the Beatles informed the 1980s style Moral Panic tribute, and there also appears to be a Twin Peaks reference there, in addition to the Paul is dead myth.
Losing is part of the wrestling business. Everyone has to do it at some point. No worker can stroll through the industry forever without at least one mark in the L column, and convincing independent contractors to do business or see things a certain way must be one of the bigger challenges facing promoters. With that in mind, I'm Adam Wilborn from WhatCulture, and these are 10 unique ways wrestlers were convinced to lose matches. Number 10. Warrior wants to sell comic books. The Ultimate Warrior was a weird bloke, to say the least. Eric Bischoff once revealed on his 83-week show that initial discussions with the man were less about actually wrestling and more about potential opportunities. Basically, Warrior wanted assurances that he'd be able to promote and sell his comic books. Losing to Hulk Hogan, yeah, that wasn't a problem. The old WrestleMania 6 rivals would go on to have one of the worst rematches in wrestling history at WCW's Halloween Havoc 1998 pay-per-view. Warrior, yeah, he didn't give a toss about that. The guy just wanted to know that merch items would be available at the table. In the end, selling comic books was more important to Warrior than wrestling matches for WCW. It bloody showed. Number 9. JBL does the right thing. Originally, JBL was scheduled to beat Chavo Guerrero on the 18th of November 2005 edition of SmackDown. The show, which was an emotional haze for everyone backstage, was quickly rewritten to reflect the sad passing of Chavo's uncle Eddie on the 13th of November. Later that same night, WWE taped SmackDown. Sensing the chance to do the right thing, though, Layfield lobbied long and hard to get the booking changed so that Chavo would go over instead. Guerrero himself has recalled knocking back JBL's offer, but the big cowboy was having none of it. He had a ton of respect for Chavo's family, loved Eddie, and wanted to put his nephew over. JBL was swayed by the sense of occasion. He knew that giving Chavo the chance to honor his fallen family post-match would be nice for the Guerreros, and that would have been next to impossible had he won the match. In a way, JBL convinced himself to lose. Fair play. Number 8. British Bulldogs rematch in Manchester. Davey Boy Smith proudly stated during the build towards the WWF's One Night Only UK special that he'd defend the European title for his terminally ill sister, Tracy. Shawn Michaels, who was gathering steam as the leader of Ultra Cool Rebels D-Generation X, he was having none of that. He went over, the show ended with heel domination, and poor Davey's sister cried. Behind the scenes, Smith had been promised a rematch in his native Lancashire. That, apparently, would be his grand moment instead. Bulldog would avenge the Birmingham loss and do his sister proud in the end. Sadly, that rematch never happened. The company did reference Davey's pent-up rage at Rebellion 1999 a few years later by having him storm into Vince McMahon's office and demand a title shot, but this paper-thin way of remembering the politics that cost Bulldog's family a heartfelt moment was an insult. You might as well have flipped him the bird and tell him to go, oh, yeah, they did. Number 7. Bret Hart's elusive Hulk Hogan promise. Bruce Pritchard blows a gasket on his podcast whenever co-host Conrad Thompson alleges that the WWF lost faith in Bret Hart as world champion in 1993. Truthfully, though, Pritchard fails to properly explain why Hart was pushed aside so that Hulk Hogan could have another ego trip at WrestleMania 9. According to Bruce, the company had to capitalize on Hogan's short window stay, and they've been impressed by Yokozuna's performances since winning the Royal Rumble too. That does not justify lying to Bret about a bumper showdown with Hulk, though, at SummerSlam in August. Hart and Hogan even shot promo pics for the posters months before that pay-per-view. Bret might have fought harder against the Yoko loss in Las Vegas had he known the Hulk wouldn't do business with him at SummerSlam. The Hulkster decided to drop the WWF title back to Yokozuna at King of the Ring, and Bret was shunted into a lower tier feud opposite Jerry Lawler instead. The big carrot dangled in front of him turned out to be a con. Number 6. Jeff Jarrett gets old payoff settled. Jeff Jarrett, who was about to bolt for WCW, famously held up Vince McMahon for more money before doing the honors for China. That, so says Jeff, though, isn't the full story. He revealed on his My World podcast that the WWF actually owed him back pay for prior events, and he was only worried that he wouldn't get them if both parties didn't settle business that night. Jim Ross had crunched the numbers and come up with a $150,000 figure, but JARRETT thought it was closer to the $300,000 mark. Eventually, after a lot of back and forth and some concern that he wouldn't get the Intercontinental title match in the ring, Vince McMahon came to Jeff's dressing room and begrudgingly handed him a big fat paycheck. In other words, Jarrett was finally convinced to do the job for China after receiving unpaid wages. That is pretty unique in my book. Number 5. If it wasn't in Canada. Yes, it's here. Yes, it's been exhaustively covered. Yes, it does still fit the unique criteria. Bret Hart obviously didn't know that he'd be screwed over at Survivor Series 1997. In fact, the Hitman was going into this match with Shawn Michaels and preparing for a car crash finish that'd lead to a rematch down the road. Then, hopefully, Bret would be willing to drop the title, just not in Canada. This is overstated as the one key part in a toxic spiderweb of a story. Hart didn't fancy doing the job anywhere, since Michaels outright refused to do the same thing in a hypothetical scenario to his face. The Survivor Series was held in Montreal, merely compounded the issue. Nonetheless, Vince McMahon had to deal with the fact that Hart point blank refused to lose the WWF title in his native homeland. That kind of demand had never really been made before, at least not to Vince, and nobody was quite sure how they were going to get the belt off Brett before he left for WCW. Long story short, McMahon convinced Brett to lose the title in a vaguely defined way when they returned to the United States. All looked rosy until the infamous screwjob happened, Hart socked Vince in the mouth, and the wrestling world wouldn't shut up about Montreal. I realise I've just added to that now. Sorry. Number 4. The follow-up that was never coming. Shawn Michaels wasn't the same egotistical nightmare he'd been in the 90s by 2005, but he still had his moments. Before SummerSlam, HBK suddenly turned heel so Hulk Hogan could pretend it was the 80s all over again and play heroic babyface. That concession was largely fine by Shawn if the pair were going to have a series of matches and if Hulk would put him over at least once. Everyone seemed to be on the same page. WWE had a dream match to help sell the biggest event of the summer, and Hogan would get the first win, then Michaels would gain some measure of revenge in a rematch. Yeah, the rematch was never actually coming. That's not gonna work for me, brother. Hulk suddenly developed a bad back, and Bruce Pritchard has revealed that Vince McMahon got cold feet on a 3-match series anyway. Basically, everyone but Shawn knew that SummerSlam was a one-and-done situation. He may not have jobbed in the main event had he known that, although the way he acted tells me he kind of already did. Number 3. WWE cancels Kurt Angle's fat contract. Kurt Angle openly admits he didn't have a sodding clue how pro wrestling worked when he met the WWF to thrash out a deal shortly after winning the Olympics in 1996. He said via his podcast that he told an astounded Vinnie Mac and Jim Ross that he couldn't lose any matches. You won a gold medal with a broken freaking neck, don't you know? McMahon, realizing that things weren't going to work out as he'd hoped, immediately cancelled contract negotiations and sent Angle packing. 3 years later, Kurt had learned a bit more about the way the business worked and tried again, but this time there was no juicy deal waiting for him. Angle will have to work his way up from the bottom. The WWF taught Kurt a lesson by sending him away empty-handed, and then they taught him another one by promising nothing but opportunities if he worked hard enough and earned his stripes on the lowest rung of the company ladder. They convinced him to lose by instilling some humility. Number 2. Mil Mascaras is allowed to job himself. Bruce Pritchard once said that Mil scoffed when officials told him he had to be thrown over the top rope at the 1997 Royal Rumble. No pins, no submissions, no over-the-top eliminations, no jobs for Mil. Mascaras wouldn't let somebody grab him and toss him out of the Rumble, so rather hilariously, the masked man eliminated himself by performing a crossbody from the top turnbuckle to the outside for, well, no real reason at all. That is when WWF refs stopped him from getting back inside the ring for more Rumble action. That is the only way Mil would do business. He couldn't fathom why anybody would want to beat him on TV, and he definitely wasn't going to let it happen on his watch. Number 1. Paul Varelans is offered oral sex. Yep, you're hearing that correctly, although it is important to note that this is a rumour, albeit one pushed by none other than Missy Hyatt in her First Lady of Wrestling book. She claimed that ex-UFC fighter Paul Polar Bear Varelans was teased with the prospect of oral sex if he agreed to lose a fixed fight to Taz at ECW's Hardcore Heaven event. Varelans had disputed this story in various shoot interviews over the years before his untimely passing earlier this year, but it's curious that Missy included such a tale in her autobiography. It's possible that this was an inside joke taken too far, or that Paul was flirting with Hyatt and things got ridiculous. Look, there is obviously no way ECW could have solicited sexual acts into any match contract. Maybe Missy was wrong, was just looking for another salacious story for her book, or maybe the men involved in the carny days of wrestling really were a bit rank. Since Heyman was heavily rumoured to have suggested it, that last guess is probably it. For the record, Varelans did lose on ECW's show, only those there know what happened backstage after that.